If you tried to boss around a hunter-gatherer 50,000 years ago, your own friends might stop talking to you. Not forever, just long enough to remind you who you think you are. That's not a joke, that's how leadership worked for most of human history. Picture a small group, maybe 20 to 50 people, moving across the land together. Hunting, gathering, raising kids, sharing food, watching each other's backs. No president, no king, no office with a name plate on the door. For the vast majority of our species' existence, this was the normal setup, not a phase before real society showed up. This was the main event, stretched out over tens of thousands of years. And here's the part that surprises people most. These groups weren't leaderless because nobody had thought of leadership yet. They were leaderless on purpose. Anthropologists who have spent years living with modern hunter-gatherer communities, the closest living window we have into this ancient way of life, describe these bands as fiercely equal. Groups like the Hadza of Tanzania or the Otzi of the Kalahari still organize this way today, in camps of roughly 20 to 30 people. Not equal by accident either. Equal because the group worked at it constantly, almost like pulling weeds out of a garden before they take over. So how did anything ever get decided? Where to camp next? When to move on? Who gets first say in settling a dispute? The answer again and again is talking. Just talking. The whole group sat together and argued it out, sometimes for hours, until most people landed on the same page. No vote, no ballot box, no show of hands. Just a long, loud conversation that ended when the group finally felt settled. This wasn't soft or sentimental. People argued hard. Voices got loud. Old grudges occasionally resurfaced in the middle of an unrelated conversation about where to camp next. But the process worked because everyone in that circle had to live with everyone else the next morning. There was no separate room to retreat to, no higher authority to appeal to over everyone's head. The conversation itself was the authority. There's a documented case from the Kalahari that captures this perfectly. A man's wife left him for his own best friend. Painful, sure, but not unusual. People moved on fairly quickly in that setting. What made this case different was the husband. He wouldn't let it go. He complained constantly, dragging the whole camp into his misery for months. Eventually, the group had to deal with him, not through a judge or a ruling from above, but through the same slow grind of group pressure and discussion that handled everything else. No single person held the power to fix it. The group held that power together. But humans being humans, someone always wants to take charge. So what actually happened to that guy, the one trying to act like the boss? If a hunter started bragging too much, ordering people around, or grabbing the best cuts of meat for himself, the group had tools ready to go. First came teasing. Sharp, relentless, often very funny teasing, designed to shrink an inflated ego right back down to a normal size. Researchers studying these dynamics call it status leveling, which is really just a polite term for the group makes fun of you until you knock it off. This teasing wasn't gentle. It could be merciless, and it often targeted the exact thing the person was proudest of. A skilled hunter bragging about a kill might suddenly find his catch described as small, lucky, or barely worth mentioning, right to his face, by people who knew perfectly well it wasn't true. The point wasn't accuracy. The point was making sure nobody got too comfortable thinking they were special. If teasing didn't work, things escalated. People would simply stop listening to him, stop inviting him along, stop following his lead on a hunt, even if he insisted he knew the best route. Imagine sending a message to your group chat and watching everyone go quiet, on purpose, every single time you post. Now imagine that silence is also connected to whether you eat dinner tonight. In the most stubborn cases, the ban could go even further. Open shunning, outright exile. And in a world with no backup tribe conveniently waiting down the road, getting cut off from your group wasn't just embarrassing. It could mean losing access to food, protection, and the people who'd normally keep you alive when things went wrong. The group's disapproval wasn't a minor social inconvenience. It had real teeth. There was also a quieter, less dramatic option built right into the lifestyle itself. Because these groups moved constantly, following game and water and seasons, people always had an escape hatch. If a camp's dynamics turned sour, you could simply leave and join a different band, since most people were loosely connected to several extended family networks at once. Anthropologists studying these mechanisms across multiple hunter-gatherer societies in Africa point out that the constant possibility of someone just walking away kept any one person from ever locking down too much control. Why bother building a power base over people who can vanish overnight? Put all of that together, and you get a system with no written laws, no police, and no single person in charge that still managed to keep order for tens of thousands of years. Not through force, through something closer to peer pressure with consequences attached. The group decided, collectively and constantly, that nobody was going to run the show. And anyone who tried found out fast just how creative their friends could get about reminding them otherwise. So if nobody was the boss, who actually got listened to, skilled hunters, good storytellers, people who stayed calm under pressure and played fair when settling arguments. Researchers describe this kind of standing as prestige, influence earned through skill and trust, not a title handed down or fought for. And prestige wasn't permanent or all-purpose either. You might have the loudest, most respected opinion in camp one day on which direction to hunt, and zero say the next day on a dispute about food, because tracking animals and mediating conflict were two completely different skill sets. Influence moved around the group depending on who actually knew what they were talking about in that specific moment. Think about how strange that would feel today. Imagine the person everyone listens to about car repairs has absolutely no say in a conversation about parenting, and nobody finds that odd. That's roughly how it worked. Respect was attached to the task, not the person carrying it around like a permanent badge. This kind of arrangement is sometimes called a big man system by anthropologists, though the term covers a range of setups, not one fixed rulebook. The basic idea holds up across many of them. A respected figure could influence decisions, organize a hunt, or settle a dispute. But only for as long as people kept choosing to listen. There was no enforcement mechanism behind it, no guards, no taxes, no army, just ongoing, voluntary trust that could evaporate the moment someone overstepped. This picture is wildly different from the one most people carry around in their heads, all crowns and spears and chieftains barking orders at terrified subjects. That image isn't wrong, exactly. It's just late, way later than people assume. Archaeologists have actually caught a glimpse of the moment things started to shift, in a culture called the Natufians, who lived in the eastern Mediterranean region, somewhere between roughly 12,000 and 9,500 years ago. The Natufians sat right at the hinge point between hunting and gathering and full-blown farming. They started settling into more permanent communities, building proper houses, and storing surplus food in dugout pits, instead of constantly moving to find it fresh. And right around that same time, their burial sites start looking different too. Some graves contain elaborate ornaments and rare goods, while others nearby have nothing at all. Researchers studying these burials describe this as one of the earliest hints of status differences showing up in the archaeological record, though they're careful to flag that the exact meaning is still debated among historians and archaeologists. Maybe it reflects an early chief. Maybe it reflects a respected elder, or a skilled healer, or something else entirely that doesn't map neatly onto modern ideas of leadership. Nobody's claiming a crown showed up overnight, but something was clearly starting to change. It's worth sitting with how strange that shift actually is. For tens of thousands of years, the entire human toolkit was built around stopping exactly this from happening. Teasing, gossip, shunning, the freedom to just walk away. And then, slowly, in certain places, those tools stopped being enough to hold the line. The pattern that follows, once farming spreads more widely across different regions of the world, gets a lot easier to recognize. Once there's a granary worth guarding, leadership starts looking very different than it did out on the open plains. Now there's something concrete to control, something to inherit, something worth defending with force instead of a long group conversation around the fire. A pile of stored grain changes the math completely. Out on the open plains, hoarding never made sense. Meat rots fast, and a successful hunter who refused to share would quickly find himself short on allies the next time he needed help. But grain sits quietly in a pit for months. It can be guarded, rationed, and handed down to a chosen heir. The very thing that made early farming life more secure also made it possible, for the first time, for one family or one person to hold onto an advantage long enough to pass it on. Historians still debate the exact mechanics of how permanent chiefs and eventually kings took hold as farming spread, and that debate is far from settled. But the broader pattern shows up again and again across different continents and different timelines. Hierarchy tends to grow alongside stored wealth, not before it. So for most of the human story, status wasn't stacked up in a pyramid with one person perched at the top barking orders down the chain. It worked more like a rotating spotlight, sliding toward whoever actually had the answer the group needed in that exact moment, then sliding right back off them once the moment passed. Next time someone in your group chat tries to boss everyone around with zero standing to back it up, just know this. Your ancestors had a name for that energy too. They just had faster, sharper, and frankly more effective ways of shutting it down than anything we've come up with since.